to either hire, for other purposes. We could debate whether or not they're a higher priority or higher value, whatever.
Brad said a lot of what I was going to say. From what I'm seeing, and I'm talking to people almost daily, there's probably going to be less money and more flexibility, and I would suggest that everybody here needs to be talking to their state reps and their state senators as well, because my experience in multiple states is if there's more flexibility, that translates to the state taking a bigger cut and less coming down. And that's something you all need to be thinking about and working on now and writing to people. It doesn't matter what side of the issue you are on. That's my view right now, very definitely.
So what I've been doing, not using federal funds, I have to be really clear. So when I send anything out in an email or a letter, it's not using federal funds. My concern is, as a small state, it's very important that New Hampshire, from our perspective, keeping the small state funding intact. And so a lot of these, one of the things besides combining programs is getting rid of the minimum funding levels for for CMAX, there's 26 states that are in the minimum funding level. And with one proposal, that would go away. So from the perspective of New Hampshire and this MPO, what we need to do is maintain those minimum levels for the smaller population states. And that can be almost a majority of the states in this country are at that minimum funding level, which is a little different issue than what Bob was talking about. So it has multiple permutations on how the money can rock and roll in and out.
Interesting use of
Right.
words there, rock and roll.
It's been
Okay. Does that wrap up 5.2, which is the unified planning work program? Okay, let's move on to 5.3, which, as you all can see, is the draft New Hampshire Rail Plan.
The draft New Hampshire Rail Plan. I guess I'll start out by saying I recognize that the meeting is going pretty long right now, so I'll just start with the caveat that I will write up a more in-depth executive summary of the New Hampshire Rail Plan to send out to everybody. It's a major document. It's 220 pages of rail document. It was done pretty well, was my overall feeling about the document. Just finished reading it up last night at about 1 in the morning, actually. It was a really nice way to fall asleep. So I'm going to go through this kind of briefly. I really want to focus a little more on the elements that I really liked in the rail plan, and then some of the things that I think are missing. Bob also gave some really good feedback about, and it was right on the line with what I saw in the document about the good stuff and the bad stuff in there. So going through the plan, Chapter 1, the introduction provides the overview for the reader about what the rail plan is in New Hampshire, what the intent of it is, and it lays out some just very broad overarching goals for the vision in New Hampshire. Chapter 2 is pretty much an inventory of the rail assets that we have in New Hampshire, the history of the rail assets. We've had, I guess, historically there were many more miles of rail in New Hampshire that were being used. Over time, a lot of these rail lines have been abandoned. Recently, New Hampshire has done a pretty good job of acquiring a lot of these right-of-ways. One of the issues is once they're gone, they're hard to get back. Some of the right-of-ways revert to, I guess, a butter landowners ownership. Yep. And that can be a real issue when, as we know, acquiring right-of-way is expensive, and once you have it, you want to keep it. So DRED has come in, and actually there's a national rule saying that if you're using the rail for recreational trails purpose and it's maintained that way, you do not lose your right-of-way on that, and it can revert back in the time that new rail opportunity is there, or new business comes in that could utilize the rail. So it really goes through the rail system and talks about how it's contracted and now how it's, I guess, set to expand a little bit again. Talks about the passenger rail system and there are 3 lines or 2 lines in New Hampshire currently. There's a short portion of the Vermonter that goes through Claremont, New Hampshire, and then back into Vermont. And that line, I believe, will be going from Montreal down to Springfield, New York City eventually. And there's already passenger rail on that, but they're going to upgrade the rail lines so they can have a little bit higher speeds, make it a little more efficient, maybe do a few more passenger runs a day. Talks a little bit about the Downeaster, which has been, from what I understand, Amtrak's greatest success story. The ridership is doing really well. The train is sold out every single day, and it has given an economic boost to Dover, Exeter, Durham, and 40% of the passengers come from New Hampshire to ride that train, which is, I think, great. I think it also talks a little bit about how New Hampshire needs to invest in their rail line and continue supporting this rail line. I don't believe we put any state money at this point towards supporting the rail line. Chapter 3 gets into freight rail in New Hampshire and passenger rail in New Hampshire in a little more depth. Really talks about the rail trends over the last few years, I guess since the end of the Big Dig effort. The North Coast line, I guess overall in New Hampshire, a lot of the tonnage has dropped because we aren't shipping out as much aggregate anymore. It goes into national trends for freight, it goes into New Hampshire trends for freight, and it makes some projections about the future of freight in New Hampshire, which is expected to double, I think, over the next 30 years. It also gets into some of the deficiencies with our freight rail right now. We have a number of connections going through New Hampshire where, well, I should start out by saying the new standard for freight rail is to be able to manage at minimum 286,000 pounds, not tons,
pound rail
on the rail. The primary New Hampshire connectors only allow 264,000 or 63.
62 or 63,
Yeah,
I don't remember what
it's the
standard
next
is.
level down, and because the new standard is coming up, a lot of these freight carriers are having to offload some of their freight so that they can meet the New Hampshire standards, even though tracks in other parts of the state are up to that other grade. So we need to really have consistency between our freight rail lines so that we don't have to go to a facility, offload some freight, and then load it back on when we get to another state. It's really inefficient, and it hurts New Hampshire's business, I guess, and economy, not being able to just have trains flow into the state now.
Is this the rail itself, or the
Yes.
underlayment, or the
I think it's a
ties?
little bit, it's the ballasting underneath, where they need to make sure that
It's the rail bed itself. It's
Yeah.
the total,
Bed,
it's
not
the
the
total,
rails,
it's
the
both.
bed. Oh, both.
It's
It's
both.
a harder steel, and they're welded also, I believe, instead of,
Separate issue in terms of weight restriction, but the bottom line is 262 and 284, what I remember
Yeah.
specifically.
Yeah.
And we are below the standard, which means National Rail Service isn't going to happen. They don't offload, they just won't, they're not
Yeah.
going to underload a car either. So it's a very
Yeah.
significant issue.
and some of the issues aren't even necessarily with the rail. Like if you think of, was it the Haverhill Bridge, the Haverhill Bridge, Red List Bridge, it's actually scheduled to be fixed, but the bridge has weight restrictions on it, so you can't get that freight into New Hampshire, and that's something that needs to change. And relative to a highway improvement, it's much lower in cost, and it lasts a lot longer than a lot of the highway improvements. So it's a good long-term investment for New Hampshire.
We're talking about curves, vertical height clearances, all of that adds into
Yep.
that. And in some cases, it is something as simple as straightening out a curve slightly.
Yeah. And one of the other recommendations for freight was really to go through, they did an inventory of all of our bridges and bridge heights that the freight rail would use. We have a number of bridges that only allow single stacking, and double stacking, we have there's I believe 2 different types or 3 different types of double stacking, which require different elevations of the bridge and different clearances. We have a number of bridges that allow mixed double stacking, which is slightly lower than the full double stacking standard, but it's New Hampshire's goal to get all of the bridges up to full double stacking, and you can really gain efficiencies of freight mobility with that. It really makes the train much more efficient, and, you know, puts it that much more ahead of using vehicles on the roadways to ship freight. Chapter 3 continued, really gets into the passenger rail role. It talks about the Vermonter. It talks about continued support of the Downeaster. It talks about how there are certain locations where transit-oriented development, which is basically making a development that is in close in proximity, has housing, and allows people to use the transit, and you can really have economic benefits from doing this type of development. An example of that, Dover right now has tentative plans for a conference center hotel along the Cochico at their train station. So that would be a good example where that train station really would help out the conference center as far as accessibility. People could be coming from Boston or Portland, flying into these major airports, and now utilizing Dover as a conference center, which can obviously help Dover, the entire economy. And another point that they made in this chapter is there's very strong statewide support for passenger rail service, where about 75% look favorably, of the residents in New Hampshire look favorably on rail, and I think it was 64% are strongly in favor of rail. And that's across the state. That's not limited to the southern portions. That includes Coos County. That includes, I believe, Sullivan and Grafton counties, and some of the other places. There's widespread rail support for rail in the state, and that message they really made clear in this document, which I was happy about. Chapter 4 gets into some of the economic impacts and environmental impacts of rail. It talks about how rail, while there aren't many jobs directly associated with the rail necessarily for freight shipping and for passengers, the jobs that it creates because of having the rail infrastructure there, by bringing tourists to the community, all the other jobs that go along with the freight rail and the passenger rail, they really give our economy a pretty good bump. And the environmental impacts, passenger rail gets cars off the road, freight rail gets cars off the road, less highway maintenance, less congestion, less air pollution, increased safety. There's a lot of reasons that rail makes sense. It doesn't make sense for everything, but there are a lot of good reasons that they cite in here. And I think even with the pretty limited share of freight that is shipped on rail in New Hampshire currently, it's pulling off roughly 115,000 trucks a year, which is, you know, we wouldn't want those on Route 16, we wouldn't want those on 95, so it is pretty significant.
Does that chapter give a lot of detail on the benefits, economic benefits?
It definitely gives some detail. It quantifies, gallons of fuel saved by riding transit, and these are pretty general statistics taken from, I believe, from American, nationwide surveys and nationwide trends and averages. So they aren't necessarily specific to New Hampshire, but some of the information is pretty easy to quantify, like, depending on number of miles your freight's being shipped on a truck, how many gallons of fuel that would use versus, on a rail line, how many gallons of fuel that would use, and it's pretty easy to quantify the difference. So.
You mentioned the Haverhill project.
Yep.
It was a bridge repair, and with that comes increased capacity. Is that one of the benefits that you're talking about?
Oh yeah, they are definitely going to bring up the bridge up to at least the 286,000. I think there are a couple lines in Mass that are up to 308,000. I don't know if they would be going with that, but it would allow heavier weight on that rail. But it really gets, it's more than just bridges, but that's one of the key things. If your bridge can't handle a train that's that heavy, then even if the rest of your line is prepared to handle a train of that weight, you can't bring it over the bridge. So,
Let me take that. That's Tiger money. All right, that's the Haverhill Bridge. That's both speed and capacity. And remember, all of our passenger movements are on rail owned by other people. So that's Pan Am Railways. Part of it is on MBTA. But the bottom line is the Haverhill project specifically is looking at speed. When you're reduced to 5 miles an hour, it's very hard to maintain average speeds of 60 or greater. And that's the bottom. The bottom line is I believe that's both a curve and a bridge at that particular point. And the primary purpose there is to upgrade rail capacity and allow speeds to be maintained. That's what it comes down to in simplest terms. Huge difference. It'll be a huge difference when that's done.
That bridge is basically falling in the water from what I understand too. It's in really bad shape and something that needed to happen, but it was going to be an expensive repair. So moving along, Chapter 6 is the recommendations, and this is their sheet. These are pretty general recommendations that they gave. I'm going to go into the big points that I noticed in the rail document, the big benefits that apply to our region, and some of the missing elements. The big things, they really encourage New Hampshire DOT to focus on increasing capacity on lines to 286,000 like we've talked about. Completing upgrades to bridge height to accommodate full double stacking. It's another big goal, especially along the primary freight lines like the Pan Am and the Capital Corridor. Completing one of the really specific to our region, or one of the recommendations that was very specific to our region, was completing upgrades from Somersworth to Ospey of the ballast rail bridges and other elements of the rail line for the North Coast rail line, which they call the Conway branch in this document. Improvements have been made from Rollinsford to Somersworth so far, but there's an additional 42 miles that need those upgrades so that the capacity on the lines is up to that 286,000. They also note that in the future, New Hampshire DOT should maintain the right-of-way for the stretch of the New Hampshire North Coast line that goes from Ospey to Conway, as it's one of the, I believe, 2 north-south connections in the state for freight rail. That's a project that we really support in our region. I think there would be a big economic bump, and it would help us attract businesses to the region that may rely on rail if they could connect north and access some of the nationwide lines and the lines up in Canada. Right now we're missing that connection. They have to go around through urban areas. They have to go up either through Maine or down through Boston to access these lines. And if we could go straight through the state, it may help out the North Country, us, and it would definitely increase efficiency of the rail line. They recommend that New Hampshire DOT set up a fund for the last mile access on lines, which is basically setting up a fund, and other states have done this. It's a partnership between New Hampshire DOT, the owner of the rail line, and the private business, where they would have some seed money to assist with getting rail sidings onto for certain businesses on locations, and they would have a grant program where private business or a rail line could apply so that they could get a siding. One of the big issues is the rail line may go there, it may go right by an industrial facility or a facility that could use rail, but right now we don't have a lot of rail sidings so that you can actually load, or I guess get the product from the facility onto the rail or from the rail into the facility. So that was a recommendation. I think that's a very good idea. And the other thing that I think is really important is increased coordination between DOT and the Department of Resource and Economic Development in New Hampshire. I think that's an area where we have missed out for development. We've been focusing on development. I think they've been focusing on North Country development, which makes a lot of sense. North Country's been having a tough time since a lot of the mills shut down. But in other areas of the state, we really have some opportunities. Down here, we have Port of Portsmouth, we have Pease, Pease Trade Port, which has a landing strip that you could land a shuttle on. We have a number of rail lines in the area. We're missing some of these connections. We need to develop these connections, and DRED needs to use these connections to attract businesses to the region. We have a high quality of life in this area, and we have a lot of assets in this area. We have intermodal opportunities in this area, and I really think that's a leverage point for getting business to this area, and I think that's important for the economy, and we could do a better job at that. Some of the missing elements in the plan, from what I saw, they did not call out Pease in the plan. I can't remember if I saw it at all, or maybe it was a short blurb about it, but it did not relate that as an asset in the plan as far as I was concerned. And another issue that was missing in the plan was talking about the condition and the status of the tracks that connect the Pan Am line with Pease and the Port of Portsmouth. I think those were two things that were missing. Both those lines are in poor condition. They need to be repaired, and to achieve the greatest benefit for the region, we really need to make those lines better so that our connections are better and we can do a better job of attracting businesses here. I think those are that's a big thing I saw missing in the document. I think they should have had more priority on the north-south connection along the New Hampshire North Coast. That's been a project that we are interested in this region, and it did bring it up, but it did not, I think, highlight the opportunities for economic development with a line there. Or could have done a better job highlighting the opportunities. I think it could have gone more in depth about Department of Resource and Economic Development attracting business utilizing rail as one of its mechanisms for our tools for attracting business and our other multimodal assets. I don't think it got deep enough into that. And yeah, once again, there was very little discussion of Pease Trade Port, and I think that that's a huge asset for the seacoast in southeast New Hampshire that we need to take advantage of.
Mark,
Those were
when you write up those comments, the Pease connection, the rail connectivity as part of the Newington-Dover project was built in to protect that so that it could be developed in the future. So
they do have, in that development, they set aside a right-of-way for rail infrastructure there.
Yeah, well, I'd just like to say there's not as much advocacy for the rail lines on this side of the state because, frankly, we haven't done a lot about it. Manchester and Nashua appropriated thousands and thousands of dollars for studies over there and trying to advocate to get the rail line from Boston up there. The other thing is, Pan Am is almost impossible to deal with, and so they own 99% of the rails, so you've got a real problem there. That's always a problem. But really, we need to get, I think, in my opinion, and I may be wrong about this, but we need to get more industrial users actually pushing and advocating for it, because it's not going to happen anywhere near here if we don't do that.
I agree.
I'll add a couple of quick things here. They all tie together. First and foremost, the big reason we're pushing for the Capital Corridor, so people understand and put it in perspective, is that it is absolutely critical to Manchester Airport. And that's something most people do not understand. Foreign travelers are not coming into countries and going to an airport and then renting cars. That's the biggest single push on that side of the state. The one critical piece here, which I think was mentioned somewhere in there, the largest problem right now is not New Hampshire's problem. It's the main line in Massachusetts. You can't get double stacks past air, Massachusetts. And the money is now just been, again, it's Tiger money, different Tiger project, that's going to allow for the upgrades of the tunnels so that for the first time ever, we are now looking at being able to support double stacking all the way from anywhere in the country into New Hampshire. So those are the two big issues that tie to that. I had two other points that relate to this rail plan. Some of them would have been after the rail plan came out. I don't know how many people are aware that they are looking at reversing an oil pipeline out of Montreal and bringing raw product this way, and also how much refining capacity we've lost in the whole New England area. All of those indicate a greater need for rail connectivity for us personally when you start talking energy costs. I just want to try and put some of that in perspective for you, because they all work together. And the last point, I don't know if you're aware, there is agreement on the new bridge. We are putting it further apart. I just saw that very recently, within the last week and a half. Maine and New Hampshire have agreed on the cost for the new bridge. The piers will be set further apart. We'll be widening the turning basin. All of this ties together, which means we'll be able to handle larger ships and theoretically more containers in and around Portsmouth. We'll never get the containers if we can't move them out of Portsmouth. So all of that ties together. We do need to come back and revisit this issue of now that the bridge issue has been resolved, and they are going to they're going to dredge the turning basin. That needs to be reflected in our comments. Thank you.
Thanks, Bob. Okay, Mark, thank you for your presentation.
No problem.
Could I just check, Bob, do you want us to include your comments today, or are you going to separately send those in?
I'm not going to send them in. I'll come in and
Okay.
talk to staff,
Okay.
and we'll work it together.
Okay, because we are on a very tight deadline.
I'm talking like maybe Tuesday or Wednesday.
Okay,
I
thank
think
you.
that would work out well. That would
Thank
be
you.
good.
Okay, moving along to item number 6, and I would advise everyone that it is now 10 after 11, and we've gone past our 11 a.m. Deadline. So, in words of one syllable or less, project updates.
I can do that. I just wanted to give an update to everybody. I heard from Keith Coda about the Lee Park and Ride. Initially, they were looking into a parcel of land to the south and west of the Lee traffic circle. We were able to discuss it with them a little bit more. We had some support from Coast and Wildcat Transit and the town of Lee, and we now have them meeting with landowner to the northeast of the traffic circle. So kind of adjacent to the Wentworth Douglas Urgent Care Facility, where there is an access road that would pull people away from the circle, and is the intersection on 125 is signalized, which are both things that transit is interested in, and we're interested in for safety for the region. And I'm going to stop there.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mark. Yeah?
I'll be very quick. I had already mentioned it, but again, traffic counts and culverts. Traffic counts, send me any requests you might have, and culverts, if you'd like one culvert inventory done as soon as possible, please let me know.
Thank you. Moving to,
I just
Oh,
want
sorry,
in terms
Ken?
of project update, anything on the park and ride in Rochester?
I haven't heard anything else about the park and ride in Rochester. I think it's still on schedule. I think they're in final design, and everything's going well as far as I know. I can look into that.
Good. Thank you.
It is not going to be a manned park and ride. It will not be like the one in Exit 9 in Dover.
So there would not be a permanent physical presence of people? It's just-
Yes.
I do believe they are putting in the utilities for
If it's
prepare
some-
for the future in case.
Thank you.
anyone else? Moving on to item 7, other business. It's always a good item. Robert?
Very quick one, specifically from what I know of the people here. This is for Ed, this is for Ken, and for anybody else who's interested. We will be having the 8th Annual New Hampshire Emergency Preparedness Conference on June 26th, all day in Manchester. No cost, no fees. You need to be there. Anybody else, staff, somebody from staff should be there this year too. Not to exclude other people, it's just I know a couple of people and I know where they're interested. That is a joint effort of our Department of Health and Human Services and our Emergency Management Director, Chris Pope, and Dr. Montero. That is a very worthwhile event. That ties into morphology. We've been talking about culvert morphology and a lot of other issues. Ties into ITS. A lot of the questions that were asked here today. You go online, New Hampshire Preparedness, and you should be able to find it, you should be able to register. We're expecting 400, 600 people will be there this year. All day at the Radisson. You might be interested. I realize your schedule is crazy anyway, but I'm just letting people know that is a very worthwhile event if you want to see how planning and emergency management and health and human services come together. Sorry, I hate to take time on a late meeting, but
Levi.
I'll be even quicker. Granite State Clean Cities is giving a one-day conference called Green Your Fleet. Topics range everything from electric vehicles to traffic software, traffic management software. Here are some flyers. Your DPW or fleet people, either police, DPW, transit, might be interested in attending. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, are you looking for a motion to adjourn?
Absolutely.
second.
So moved.
Second.
Okay. Not debatable, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
We're out of here.
I posted one up on those boards too.
I need a hard secretary. And he said, well,
About halfway down.